Is as I take the classes, I take notes for myself on things that resonate that I want to apply to my own writing and just things that I find interesting. Then I re-go through the notes for the podcast and I highlight certain sections of my notes so that I can share it with you guys. And that's what I'll be sharing today. And this is from Walter Mosley's Masterclass. Walter Mosley teaches fiction and storytelling. He's an extremely prolific writer that I had never heard of before this. What I like to do, though, is everyone within like the writing section of Masterclass, like I check out like their little trailer that they have, and if I'm feeling it, I take the class. And there was just something about Walter's like energy and how he comes off that made me want to take his class, and he definitely did not disappoint, and I'm really glad that I did. So I'll just be sharing some random sections that I highlighted here from my notes. The first one is he wrote the first sentence down randomly, which made him believe he could be a writer when he was 34 years old. So all of you thinking, I'm too old to start writing and stuff like that, who gives a fuck? Just do it. Stephen Pressfield, by the way, he tried writing like throughout his life to little to no success, commercial success. Like his first big break, which was I think was Legend of Bagger Vance, like his first popular book that also became a movie. I think he was in his I think he was 50, to be honest, 50 or 50 something. He's like in his mid to late 60s now, I believe. But he was like either in his late 40s, mid to late 40s, or 50s already. So all that like mentality of, you have to be writing from like the womb. Don't listen to all that. Everybody's different. People do things at their own pace. If you want to write, write. Anyway, he started when he was 34 years old. And since he has published 60 books. That's fucking amazing. He said, if you're afraid to write the novel, okay, but write the novel. I'm not asking you to not be afraid, but take the jump. And the way he writes, his process, which I like getting into with like writers and creatives, is as follows. He wakes up on most days around 5 or 6 a.m. He writes 1,000 words each day, which takes him approximately 3 hours. Then the next day, he reads those 1,000 words and makes minor edits and then writes 1,000 more. Tarantino has a similar process as well, which is interesting. Like that 3 hour mark seems to be like some sort of sweet spot, at least for the folks whose writing I'm into. Tarantino wakes up. I don't remember the time, but I want to say he just wakes up when he wakes up, and he writes like on a balcony in his house, like an outdoor balcony that overlooks his pool. And I think he said he writes for 3 hours, and then he takes a swim in the pool, has lunch, goes about his day, and the next day continues where he left off, etc., and just rinse and repeat. Continues that process. What else do I have here? Learn about your characters as you write them. This layers and complicates them. This is something that I do. Of the, type of writer, if you can call it that doesn't outline much. And I kind of let the characters develop and speak to each other and let them become who they're going to become. But I never thought of it from the perspective of this layers and complicates them, which people like that, right? As a reader, as an audience, you want complex, deep characters, not just very surface vanilla characters. And I get that makes sense that it does complicate and layer the characters when you go about letting them develop as you write. And he goes on to say, in the beginning, you know who your character is, where he or she is right now. The only question is where he's going to get, and you don't need to know that in the beginning. Where he's going to get to is the novel. What else did I write down here? Story is what... Okay, this was an interesting breakdown. Story, this is story versus plot. And something I appreciated about Walter's his economy of words, the precision by which he explains certain things that other writers that I've listened to and that I've read explain similar or the same concepts, but in like convoluted ways that I'm kind of like, what the fuck? What's the difference between story and plot? And I feel like in a couple different places, he made me get it. Also with like narrative POV, point of view, which I'll get to in a bit. He explained that very well also. But here's what he had to say about story versus plot. Story is what happens. Plot is when the reasons it happens is revealed to the reader. Like how it happens, why it happens. So that's what plot is. Story is what happens. Plot is how and why it happened. Okay, next up is the POV. Narrative is whose POV is the story told from. Third person narrative is a person, proverbially, is sitting on the shoulder of the characters. And since they are not that character, they don't have the emotional responses of that character, but they see it and explain it. And they have insight into what the character is thinking. In this POV, the narrator, quote unquote, can jump off of one person's shoulder and onto another character's shoulder. Another type of narration is a universal narrator, which is like God. They know everything and anything about what's going on. And another one is first person, which is just the point of view from one character's point of view. But what was interesting, which I hadn't thought of, was you can change the narration throughout the book. For example, if you want to do first person, you could do like one chapter from one person's first person point of view. You don't have to write the entire book from that one person's point of view. Then the next chapter could be a different person's point of view, etc. Something else that made sense to me was, as much as possible, go beyond being expository. Use kang, kang, kang instead of two metal cans smashed together in the distance. Show what's being seen by the main character and or narrator. So this plays into the whole show, don't tell mentality that most writers have, going beyond being expository and relying on exposition, which obviously you need to a degree, but there's different ways to get certain scenes across that don't have to be completely spelled out and explained in like textbook format. You know, in the example he gave, by using the kang, kang, kang verbiage, you convey the same idea to the reader of two metal cans smashed together in the distance without having to spell it out, and while also allowing the reader's imagination to work. I saw this really great 3-part PBS documentary on Hemingway called Hemingway recently that I'll probably do a review or recap of during one of the Random Rant episodes. But something from that I can draw a parallel to this point is there was a writer who was giving feedback on one of Hemingway's short stories, and he put forth this important point where he says that he believes the job of a writer is to provide just enough words, just enough description, just enough exposition so that the reader has enough to work with to then fill in the rest of the story using their imagination. And in doing so, play out a movie in their minds. And that movie is going to be different from reader to reader to reader. And I thought that was pretty dope. Here is something else that I took away from Walter Mosley's Masterclass, which is, if you have language that is almost prose in poetry, then in prose, you can write language that is almost poetry. Now, me personally, I'm pretty dense when it comes to poetry. Like, it doesn't permeate usually. But this definitely resonated with me for a couple reasons. When I was younger, especially, what I tried to write was poetry. Whether it be just like poems to girls or a way that I was trying to express a certain thought, that's the way I like tried doing it. And by poetry, I use that term very loosely. It was just like paragraphs that had some rhyming words within it. And I remember even back when I used to be a busboy and wait tables and bartend and stuff. And even back then, I remember I would have just like random thoughts of what I would jot down and in parentheses put PP, possible poem. And it was like the seed of a thought. And it was like the title of something. Or I would think of a sentence and I would like jot it down in the order book that I would take orders with. And I had tons and tons of those like little scraps of papers that I would just like rip off, put in my pocket, and usually never even like revisit to actually write out the possible poem. And also, I was told once that my writing sounds Dr. Seussish. Like it has like a rhythm and a flow to it in that way, which I took as a compliment. Who knows if it was meant as such. But I'm also drawn, like one of my favorite parts of writing is writing dialogue. And there is a sing-songy like rhythm to good dialogue that I definitely resonates with me and that I gravitate towards. So this definitely made sense to me. Then he was talking about Alice Walker's The Color Purple, and he mentioned that she was a very good writer. And this is what I jotted down from what he said. Quote, "She was a very good writer, and I still had a lot to learn to get to that place. But still, I could imagine getting to the place of writing that language," which is really encouraging, right? And that has also happened to me. I guess, that's why I jotted this down as kind of like a reinforcement of certain thoughts that I've had. When like reading someone's work or watching a TV show, you're completely engaged in it. And with me, for example, I get lost in TV shows like everybody else, obviously, and books and stuff. But I'm also looking at it from the perspective of the actual craft of what goes into actually writing it. How was this decision made? So in my mind, I'm like peeking behind the curtain and saying, oh, I would take this next scene in this direction, or what have you. And when things like that have happened, I find myself thinking along the same lines. Like, I'm not at that level yet, but it's written in such a way that gives me hope because I like get it and I know I can reach that level and write as well or close to it as some of the writers that I respect and look up to within the space. Another takeaway I have here from lesson 9 is, this was an interesting one. You don't need to read a lot to be a good writer. Just tell a good story. Deep, powerful. Reading is very important, one of the most important things, but not doing it will not stop you from being a writer. There's something from, I believe it's a quote from Stephen King, and I believe it's from On Writing, the book that I'm always referencing here on the podcast, which is a phenomenal read. You guys should definitely check out, especially if you're into writing or want to be. But a famous quote of his is, and it's true of a lot of writers, that you need to read a lot to have the tools to be able to write. And they liken it to, not doing so is like bringing a knife to a gunfight type of thing. And I'll be honest with you, the reason why I jotted this down and it spoke to me, the fact that you don't need to read a lot to be a good writer, is that I was never big on reading before. Like even in high school, like all the books that, teachers would assign to you in class to read, I never, ever read a book, ever. I would look up I would get by assignments, like maybe read a chapter or two when necessary, when it was like specific like that, or if we had to do like a book report, I would look up like the Cliff Notes, shout out pinkmonkey.com, I think was a go-to source back then. And I was never into reading like that, but I was into attempting to express myself through writing. Now, he does go on to say that reading is very important and it's one of the most important things, which is true. And as I've gotten older and I've gotten more into reading, especially, shout out to audiobooks, but also just like actual reading, like you see the importance in it. But I appreciate that he highlights that you don't have to be that. You don't have to be, again, the person that started writing from the womb and started reading from the womb and was a book nerd and reads a book a week in order to be a writer. Me personally, like, I'm not into any of these, this is what you need to be, this is what you need to do to be that type of mandatory tropes. And maybe that's like the creative leave me alone side of me. But I appreciate that someone as accomplished as Walter Mosley also recognizes that. And then he goes on to like give examples. There could be like a guy in the corner talking to his friends that has never read a book in his life, but just captivates the audience that he's speaking to in the way he tells stories. And all writing is storytelling. And let's see. Then I jotted down that I love his energy, which I do, Walter Mosley. And when speaking to how to deal with prejudice in the industry, he says something along the lines, and I'm paraphrasing, that you just have to realize that sometimes you're going to get hit and accept it as part of the game. And that made sense to me. I mean, that Walter Mosley, his father was black, his mother was Jewish, but he was speaking to not just that type of racial prejudice, but the way that folks try to like box you in. And, you know, his first popular book was like a mystery novel, but then he also wrote science fiction, and then he also wrote nonfiction, and like editors, publishers rather, you know, try to box you in. If you write a successful mystery book, they say, write that, keep repeating that for the rest of your life. And sometimes as a creative, you know, you want to express yourself in different ways and share different parts of yourself. He explained stories of, he was like, all right, fine, that's fine. I'll publish my mystery novels with you, and I'll go somewhere else and do the science fiction stuff, and I'll go somewhere else to a different publisher and do the nonfiction stuff. But he said in taking that type of feedback and prejudice of trying to like box you in and stuff like that as just getting hit, like that's part of the game, and you go with the flow, and you just continue doing what you set out to do anyway. And I think that's true of a lot of champions and successful people. Like they have that type of mentality of the peaks come with the valleys and vice versa. And I just have a couple more things to share from the masterclass. This one is, the more you write, the closer you get to your core, the person within you. The more you write, the more talented and capable you become, and the better the ability to control yourself will be. Writing about an idea or a character or a feeling you're trying to get across, that process will help you learn about you, who you are, how you see the world around you. And I couldn't agree more. That's, I think to an extent, what we're all searching for, like in life in general, and especially as writers or creatives, trying to get more so to the core of who you are. And then lastly, I'll close with this. He says in relation to choosing a career, being a writer, that this life promises two things, happiness and heartbreak. Then he adds that he tells a story about a friend of his that, you know, worked, had a successful career financially, and, you know, was the type of person that was like a workaholic, worked around the clock all the time, on call. And then he was getting ready to retire, and he was speaking with his friend, and Walter's take was, oh, great, now, you know, any of the like hobbies and stuff like that you've had, you can focus more on that and you know, don't have to worry about financial stuff, and, you know, like really follow a passion. And that his friend came back with that he never got into anything, never had any hobbies, never had any passions. It was just like work, all work, no play. And he found that Walter did devastating. And then to that, he said that he feels everyone should have an art or passion that's just for them, that nobody could ever take away from them. And I could not agree more. Hence the Spun Today Podcast, FRACTAL, Make Way for You, spuntoday.com/short stories, spuntoday.com/free writing, and the constant sharing and thought process behind what we were speaking about before in relation to not selling your IP so that you can continue to own the things that you create, reap the benefits from them financially if you ever get to that point, but mainly so that you can continue doing what you want to do when you want to do it. And that is my recap of Walter Mosley Teaches Fiction and Storytelling, the Masterclass. I will link to it in the episode notes in case you guys want to check it out.